It is time for me to attempt to paint my first ever Warhammer train, and for this I have picked the Megadroth Remains. The closest backstory that I can find around these remains and their origin is that of the Magmadroth. These are massive volcanic beasts, and this hugely inspired the custom base that I created. For the custom base, I decided to make it look like the skeleton had been left behind at the bottom of an active volcano. Let me show you how. The first step was to cut out all the different parts of the skeleton remains and then to smooth down any rough edges. For this I used a nail filer. This will help make sure all the parts connect seamlessly. The next step is to glue everything down together. For this I use the Citadel plastic glue. The thin nozzle is great for getting into all the tiny cracks and glue lines. You can also use the glue to melt the plastic where the join lines are to help smooth these out. Okay, so the first thing I've done is I've got this plastic lid here that I'll be building the base on. The reason for this is just so I can peel it off when the base is dry. The mouth moves like this, and I want to make sure that the base here is flat enough so that it still can have that movement, so this won't be glued down, this bit here. Then there's this bit that joins the two parts of the skeleton together. That will be glued down so it will stay in the shape. Finally, I've got this old sweet tub and a glass of water, and this will be to mix the formula in for the sculptor mould. I'm not sure if sculptor mould is the best thing to be touching and breathing in, so I did opt to wear gloves and a mask for this step. I wanted the sculptor mould to reach a really thick consistency so it would better emulate the rock texture I'm aiming for. I tried as much as possible to keep within the marker lines that I'd made, but other than this I just stacked on the sculptor mould until I was happy with the shape. I made sure to keep it really random and not to smooth any parts down other than the top where the moving mouse piece will sit. The next step was to embed the remains into the sculptor mould whilst it was still wet. This allowed me to push the remains into the mould rather than having it sit on top when dry. This helped give it a more realistic look, as though it was buried amongst the rocks and had been there for some time. Once dry, the next step was to use a few coats of black acrylic paint mixed with Mod Podge. This step helps strengthen the base and ensure that no parts of the base will break off. There will be a lot of tiny crevices, so make sure you really get in there with the paintbrush and cover everything. This was a particularly important step for this project, as this piece will be used and moved around a lot as opposed to using it as a display piece. Once it has dried, you can give it a white coat spray to help bring out those details. I used the Citadel Raft Bone Primer for this, as it was the perfect undertone for the bones. As you can see, I only sprayed the model from above, which means that it helped to catch some of those shadows and highlights. For the base colours, I used cheap acrylic paints. I picked a mixture of warm tones to create the lava effect under the rocks. Once I was happy with the mix of colours to create my lava, I then went back over the top with a brown dry brush to give the illusion that the lava is peeking out from rocks amongst the cracks. I was happy with the finished look, but I did decide to add another effect later on to really sell the volcanic rock effect. Next up was painting the details for the base. I made sure as much as possible to keep away from the bones when I was painting the base, so I was left with a thin line where the base met the bones. To fill this in, I used smaller paintbrushes so I could get better accuracy, and I also switched over to my Citadel paints. There was also some human remains and other skulls at the base that I used a mix of Citadel paints to fill in. I'll pop on the screen all of the Citadel paints that I used for each step. Next up, I started painting the bones. I wanted to have certain parts of the bone be darker, so I began by filling in those details. I then added on some contrast layers to coat and finished off with a dry brush in between layers to create more depth. And I think we're about finished, so let's take a look at the finished piece.